The best listeners are those who can have enormous compassion and patience. Hello and welcome to the Business of Happiness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Taryn McCarthy, and today we are talking about the art of listening. I cannot wait to share this episode with you. It really has made a huge difference in my life. And I want to say thank you. Thank you so much for joining me last episode when we were chatting with Stephanie Snyder. She's the host of the Opulent Life podcast, and there's some really fascinating insights in that interview. I also want to say welcome to all of our newest Hive members, all of our new members at the Business of Happiness Hive, our private Facebook group. Come check us out. What an awesome community we're creating there. But today I want to welcome specifically Sherry, Melissa, Eva, Tiana, Riddhi, Wanda, and Sandy. And once again, just so excited to have you guys be a part of this awesome community. Let's get started on today's talk. We're talking about the art of listening and why are we doing this? What is it? Well, I know that listening has made a huge impact in my life in terms of increasing the relationship building that I've been able to do with active listening. I know that it's also been an enormous part of my inner fulfillment and happiness. It's really a lost art. It's something that we've lost along the way as we've gotten better and better at multitasking. We are bombarded constantly by incredible stimuli that we really have missed opportunities to pay attention and to really focus on listening. And so listening has become a superpower that really sets you apart from everyone else, especially in business, especially in leadership, and uniquely in healthcare. I mean, how many times have you noticed that completely missing in our new system of healthcare? So what we're going to do in today's discussion is focus on how listening can increase connection, how listening can increase value, how listening can increase success, and how listening can increase happiness. I'm going to show you some tips and tools of how to increase your expertise at active listening and to really hone in on the craft of the art of listening. I used to be someone who was so wrapped up in my own self-judgment that I couldn't even be available to listen when I was talking to someone else. And I think this is very common. And sometimes we need to just let that go a little bit. So we're going to talk about all aspects of listening, the physical attributes of listening, the mental attributes of listening, the emotional attributes of listening, and then we're even going to sprinkle a little bit of spiritual aspects of listening. All very powerful perspectives in terms of how we can be better listeners. And at the end of today's episode, I think you should have some really great tools, and I'd love this to stimulate a little bit of a conversation. So if you have any perspectives, please put notes below. Let me know at the bottom of this episode what your perspective is and how listening has been impactful in your life. If we take listening just from a very elementary perspective in terms of what is listening, not necessarily to people, we'll get there, but just the act of listening to anything really takes focus. And I argue that listening forces you to be present in the moment. If you think about sitting quietly at the beach, just listening to the waves crashing, immediately you're brought to a very calm place. It allows you to put away all the distractions and focus your attention on what you're listening to, whether it's just listening to your own breath, as we find the power of in meditation, or listening to bird song, or even listening to a beautiful piece of music. Do you see how just talking about these things calms us down and brings us to a place of focus and presence. And right there, my friend, is a very, very important aspect of listening, which is making us present in the moment. And we know that that increases our happiness factor. And, when we can be present with another human being, that allows us to have deeper connections as well. That is the second superpower of listening, is that we can cultivate really deep communication with one another, really deep relationships with one another, when we can be very present and listen. And as I mentioned in the introduction here, it really has become a lost art. How often do you feel like someone's actually listening to you? This is the superpower in business and in leadership, because employees are feeling more and more alone and ostracized, especially now coming through this full year of the pandemic, all of us with our masks on, all of us unable to see each other's expressions, or on a Zoom call where that Zoom is dropping in and out and the internet is or isn't reliable, and then not really knowing if you're paying attention to me because you're so busy paying attention to something else in the room. It's so easy to be distracted when we're just doing so through a screen. So just by being present and allowing yourself to listen, you're already setting yourself apart from the rest of the business world. You're already investing in this enormous superpower that is so unique right now. Just being able to slow down long enough to listen does not even require a lot of time, because that's the one thing that has been stripping us of the power of listening, has been this unrealistic notion that time is slipping away from us and that we have to rush through and multitask every second of the day. I know firsthand how that has impacted healthcare. As if you are in healthcare, or even if you're just a patient, you've seen this. How often have you been to the doctor's office and they're so busy doing 100 other things, you're not even really sure they're listening to you? In fact, I'm sure they're not, right? Because there's so many requirements in terms of productivity established in healthcare, and litigious reasons for documenting conversations, that what we often see is the doctor or the dentist or the pharmacist facing away from you and facing the screen and typing everything you're saying, or maybe things they're thinking. You would never know. But do you really feel listened to? And I see the same thing in parenting. I catch myself. I catch myself all the time trying to make dinner while I'm listening to this conversation, or do 3 things at once while I'm listening. And am I really being present for my daughter or my son in that moment? And how are they perceiving being heard and being listened to? And what are they learning about the value of their voice and their opinion? Some very deep insight here into how you make other people feel if you're not able to tap into this very unique art of listening. Because, I really do think it is unique. And I think that it's one of the big deterrents of a healthy, communicative, loving relationship in partnership as well. Business partners do this all the time as well. We forget to be present for one another and give each other the honor of listening. When you do so, you automatically make people feel heard. When you give them the respect of listening, you automatically make them feel special, and you create this connection with them. And that's been unique. It's something we're all craving. It's interesting because people who listen, research shows, people who are able to be present and listen are perceived differently by the person speaking. They're perceived as being more intelligent, more stable and secure in life. They're perceived as being wealthier. They're perceived as being more highly educated. Isn't that fascinating? And don't you think that too? When someone really pays attention to you, don't you have that automatic preconceived notion about them? wow, they must be really stable in their life because they're giving attention to me. Wow, they must be really secure. And so that's a magic lesson for us all in this moment. If you are looking for increasing your perception in whatever business you're in, this one simple tool will do it for you. And the reason why is because nobody is doing a good job of listening right now. So automatically you'll be set up above the rest. So as we talk about the art of listening today, I'm going to draw from some insights that I've had over the years from studying this. It's been such an important tool for me to learn, and that's why I've been learning about this for decades, not only in business and in terms of leadership, because I really care about my employees, and I am so intent on letting my patients know that they're being heard. I have to listen to them. So active listening and the art of listening has been something I've been researching for a long time. It also was very impactful when I was interviewing new dental students, incoming dental students into the University of New England Dental School a few years ago, when we were studying active interviewing skills. And so these tools I share with you today because I've found that they've become a huge part of all aspects of my life and very powerful indeed. We're going to break it down in terms of physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. These are 4 fundamental states of our being that some good friends of mine, Alan Lazaros, Kevin Palmieri, and their good friend Alex Hinkle created in terms of breaking down how we perceive the world and looking at it from each of these perspectives. So I'll share with you today how the art of listening can be looked at from each of these perspectives as well, and how we can hone in on that craft, breaking it down into these 4 very simple perspectives. So number 1 is, how do we better ourselves at the art of listening from a physical standpoint? Well, the one very obvious thing is eye contact. Once again, another lost art. And it seems so simple. And why have we forgotten to do this over time? But just simply looking someone in the eye. Going back to that example I was giving earlier about the doctor just looking away, immediately you feel disconnected. Immediately you feel like she's not paying attention to you. So being able to give ourselves eye contact once again. And number 2, our entire body language, facing your whole body towards the person who is speaking to you. This has been so critical for me as a mother. I don't know why as moms we forget to do this with our children, who are arguably the most important people in our lives. And just giving my 14-year-old my full body attention and facing him makes him feel so much more validated. And the same is true from my husband. Wouldn't you agree? From your partners, your romantic partners, all I want is for you to face me and show me your full attention. What it does is it tells our bodies where our attention should go, and it establishes our intention of who we're focusing on in this moment. So eye contact, your physical body positioning, and then the third part of a physical aspect of the art of listening is being quiet. I can't even believe it. It's that simple. Just closing your mouth and listening. That's it. It's so funny that we so badly want to solve problems. We want to make the person feel like we have a solution for them. And so we jump to thinking constantly about what we're going to say next, but just being quiet. So if you just think of those 3 very simple physical acts, eye contact, facing towards the person who is speaking to you, and then not saying a word. Easy to do, but once again, wouldn't you agree with me? Really, really rare to have someone give you that much honor and respect. When we look at the mental side of the art of listening, we're slipping into it a little bit when I talked about not saying a word. We're slipping into it when we say all those things running through your head while you're listening to somebody. And men and women alike do this. I think there's been some, historically, people think men always want to solve the problems and women are better listeners. I think there's a feminine trait that this can be true for. But in this society and in this day and age, we've really maximized every second of the day by making sure that we're as, what's the word I'm looking for, as efficient with every second that we have. And by doing so, we've started this dialogue inside our head that's already coming to the solution before the question has even been posed. And so being able to quiet our minds and just not force the answer right away. If we think of it as the goal being to shine the spotlight on the person who's speaking and take it off of you. In other words, I don't have to perform. I don't have to have the answer. I just have to be here and hold space for the person who is speaking to me. It actually takes a lot of pressure off as a business leader, even as a mom. Trust me, there are times when my 14-year-old comes at me with a conversation that I am not ready for. So just by allowing yourself to not have to come up with the answer in that moment puts away a lot of stress. It also allows you to let that person shine and really give the message that they're trying to give to you so that you can be present to hear it. The second part of the mental perspective, the art of listening, is setting the intention that I'm not going to do anything else in this moment, that I'm not multitasking. I am now going to listen to you. And it's interesting because sometimes we have to make time for this. There's not always time for this. When I'm driving or when I'm doing something's boiling on the stove or when I'm treating a patient, there's not always time to step aside and say, now you have my full attention. So I really do think it's okay in all aspects of our lives to ask the speaker to give us a special time when we can give them our full attention and focus. This is valuable in business because we want to make sure that our employees feel heard. But sometimes you might have 3 patients in the chair, or you're in the middle of a phone conversation, or even, to be honest with you, in the middle of responding to emails, if you've dedicated your time to that, you can very respectfully ask, please, can we set aside a time where I can give you my full attention because you are important to me and this message is important to me. This is also a great tool in conversation with a partner or in a relationship because sometimes, husbands and wives will come at each other from different perspectives during the day and catch each other off guard. And that's often where misunderstanding happens. And I think it's absolutely okay to say, I really want to pay attention to this conversation. I really want to give you my full attention. Can we please do that this evening? Or can we please set aside a time where I'm not distracted by 100 other things? I would feel so validated if I heard that from my partner. And absolutely, as a patient, if a doctor said that to me, look, I really want to hear what you're saying. Let's set aside another appointment where I can give you my full attention. I mean, that would be enormously rewarding. And then the third part of the mental aspect of the art of paying attention is understanding the goal is, am I knowing and hearing and understanding what is being said? So that's the goal of listening. The goal of listening is to be present. The goal of listening is to hear every word. But then also, am I understanding it? Am I understanding the perspective? And this is where some great tools came from motivational interviewing. Number 1 is mirroring. When you mirror someone, that means that you're actually almost parroting what they said. You're just saying it in a different way. So after we've already listened and not said a word, now's the time to step in and see if we're actually understanding what the speaker is saying. So we're echoing back what they said. It makes them feel validated. It clarifies your understanding. So some phrases that you might use are, I hear that you're feeling blank, or what I hear you saying is, and the nice thing about that in terms of a leadership position is sometimes we get it wrong. Sometimes, just from our own experience and our own background, and perhaps the person who's speaking to you doesn't use the same language that you do. And I don't mean necessarily they don't speak English. I mean that their cultural background or the way that they were brought up, they use different language to say different things. Or maybe even generational language is different, right? You might say one thing one way, whereas someone 20 years your junior or your senior might express it differently. So when we say what I'm hearing you say is, then we're able to put it back in our language and make sure that our understanding is exactly what they're saying. This is a great tool for motivational interviewing. And then you can also ask clarifying questions. So beyond just mirroring and repeating and echoing what they're saying, you can ask even more in-depth questions like, why is this important to you? So this would be a follow-up to what I heard you say was. Then you would say, why is this important to you? Or what exactly do you mean by that? Another open-ended one that I really like is tell me more. I resort to that one often when I'm caught off guard. When a conversation is brought to me and I'm not ready for it. That's when I often say, tell me more, because it gives me permission to take a little breath, to process what's going on, and it lets the person who's speaking to me still continue to express how they feel and to express what they're hoping to bring to me. You know, this kind of goes into the next aspect of listening, which is the emotional aspect. And when I mentioned being caught off guard, sometimes our own emotions come up and we begin to get uncomfortable in conversation. And that can cloud our listening as well. I love this book by Kim Scott called Radical Candor. It was brought to me by my really dear friend and excellent leader in her own right, Sarah Rapucci. And it's a phenomenal book. I highly recommend it to team leaders, business leaders, and anyone who's in communication or who values communication in the business world. And Kim Scott said that when emotion gets more intense in conversation, that's when we need to increase our compassion. It's interesting because we tend to do the exact opposite. When we're in a business situation and you're in a very linear-minded conversation or task, or even the whole day, and you're just task-oriented and thinking from a very masculine perspective in terms of getting tasks completed and doing what you need to do during the business day, when someone comes to you with a very emotional response, we become defensive and get caught off guard. And this is where Kim Scott says we need to do the opposite of what we feel like we do naturally, which is deflect, distract, change the subject, move it along. You can imagine all of those feelings start coming up. And she says we actually need to increase our compassion, remembering that nobody likes to cry in front of their boss. They're not doing it on purpose. Even patience, or maybe it's a friend who doesn't know you that well, or a colleague who you're not particularly close with. It's enormously embarrassing to be that vulnerable. And often there's something more that they're not sharing with you that's happening behind the scenes. And it's not important always for you to know that. You're not their therapist. You're not their coach. But it is important to offer compassion. That's the critical aspect. Once again, can you see the power behind this tool? Can you see how just offering compassion in that moment is such a unique response, and that immediately it elevates your position in their mind and it offers a sense of trust? Trust is so hard earned in this day and age. It's hard for us to trust people, but just by offering compassion, you already engender enormous trust in the person who's speaking to you. And it's really interesting because there is something called compassion fatigue. And I know it well. It's, business leaders and business owners know this well. And if you've ever felt that, where you just feel like, I really can't be compassionate in this moment, I have what's the term is compassion fatigue. One easy action that you can do to turn it around is to disconnect. What's happened is you've become so involved in this very sympathetic download. Sympathetic nervous system has been controlling your day, and you've become very narrow, literally narrow in your thinking, narrow-minded, if you will. If you think about the sympathetic nervous system, what it does is it creates a discrete focus. It's what clicks in when you need to focus very carefully on one specific task. And we lose the greater perspective. Your parasympathetic nervous system is what we tap into when we look at something bigger, like a vista or a beautiful scene, or we take some deep breaths and we slow down our heart rate. But if you've been functioning all day, which many of us do in the business world, stimulating your sympathetic nervous system to a very high degree, it's very hard to tap into compassion. It's very hard to slow yourself down. I see this particularly with my son when he's playing video games. That same fight, flight, or freeze reaction that he's been cultivating for hours and hours, it's very difficult to step outside of those sympathetic nervous system reactions. And finding compassion and that human side of us is a challenge. So what the technique is just to disconnect. Take a walk, get outside, do some deep breathing. The deep breathing really does work well. Just taking some deep, intentional breaths. In fact, if you're not able to get outside and to feel the sun and the wind on your face, which I think is enormously powerful to step out of that very action-oriented sympathetic nervous system response, if you're not able to do that, just sitting with your eyes closed and taking a few deep breaths does work. Another way to combat compassion fatigue is to tap into your humanness. So finding a moment to reconnect with someone who really brings you feelings of enormous love and joy. Things like remembering a baby or your family members or just a puppy. How can you not tap back into compassion when you imagine holding a puppy in your arms? So all of these things can bring us right back. And that can be the first little warning sign that you're having compassion fatigue, when you're unable to feel human compassion for the person who's speaking to you. And that can just be a little indicator. You don't have to have a lot of self-judgment about it. You don't have to define yourself as being non-compassionate. Just know this is a little warning sign. I'm having trouble seeing the compassion in this moment. I need to take a break and tap back into my humanness. This brings us to the spiritual aspect. We've slowly fallen into the spiritual aspect of listening, which who knew there was so many complexities to the art of listening. But really, the best listeners are those who can have enormous compassion and patience and focus on the person who's speaking. And I read this quote that said, "The art of listening requires self-respect." Whew, that's a big one. But I believe it. I believe that in order to be fully present with another human and listen to them fully and openly, you need to have your own self-respect. You need to have your own confidence that your listening ear is worthy to hear whatever this person has to say. And you need to be able to put aside any of your own self-judgment and any of your own insecurities so that you can be present. Imagine that negative chatter that's happening that's keeping you from being present and hearing what somebody's saying. All these things that you're beginning to think, how can I prove myself? How can I validate myself? What am I going to say next so that she thinks I'm worthy? What am I going to say next or do next? Or how can I be you hear all that anxiety building up. So really, the art of listening requires self-respect. I think it requires respect for the person who's speaking as well. And that's that humanness aspect of it. In order to have compassion, we have to recognize enormous respect for the person who is speaking and recognize that we're all human. We have all so many similarities and we share so many experiences. And that really, whoever is speaking to you is very similar to who you are as well. But being able to respect yourself in that moment and then being able to respect the person who's speaking. Wow. Who knew, right? The art of listening, a really lost art form, if you ask me, and one that we all could be better at. And really, there are these very simple aspects that can increase our capacity to listen with more intention and more attention to whoever is speaking to us. And once again, just a very powerful tool in business and in life. And I argue in our own happiness. Because when you're able to cultivate those meaningful relationships, when you're able to slow down and be present in the moment, and who wouldn't feel fulfilled when it's translating into greater success in your business as well? All of those things just by paying attention to listening. Thank you for joining me for this episode. Thank you for giving me the honor of listening to this episode. Really, I do not take this lightly. I know that you can spend your time any way you choose to, and the fact that you've listened to this episode is such an honor to me. So thank you, and I honor you as well. Please remember to check out our private Facebook page if you would love some more insight. At the end of this episode, I'm going to actually write down all of these and put them in a PDF form for all of my Hive members so that you can come back and follow some of these tips and tools that I have for the enormous power of the art of listening. And next week, we're going to be talking to Jay Reese. He is a podcaster himself, but what I love about Jay is he wrote this incredible book. He is an author, and he wrote a book called Legend. And what it is all about, it's a fiction book about superpowers in a family and how they use these superpowers to overcome decisions and choices that their parents made before them and how that's affected them in their lives. It's a powerful book, and he's a great guy, so I'm excited for you to meet him. Until then, I hope you have a fabulous week, and always remember, today is going to be a great day. Bye-bye.